an $800,000 richer meal. So this is one of 4 watches created specifically for Diego Maradona. This is a watch he wore personally. Answer the question of why is this watch so damn expensive? Today we live in a world where the simplest questions cannot be answered. I'm here to answer a very simple question, or maybe not so simple questions. Why are watches so expensive via our unboxing videos? So rather than looking at a watch specifically and individually and saying, this is expensive because of this, and this is expensive because of that, I'd rather go through the topics of what makes certain watches expensive, or I should say the genres, while showing you some eye candy and as an example. So this is going to be about the topics, not so much about the watches, but we'll show you some expensive watches, that's for sure. I'm going to start off by trying to break down the genre, and I promise you that most likely by the end of this video, you'll be even more confused as to why watches are expensive, but this is my take, so bear with me. Let's start talking about the obvious, and the obvious is going to be complications, right? How complicated is a particular watch? We can have a watch today that simply shows you time and date. Time, second time zone and date, i.e. a GMT. We have world time watches that show you times around certain parts of the world or the different time zones. We have annual calendars, right? These are the watches that are going to show you what date and what day of the week it is, right? And obviously the date. We have watches that are full-blown perpetual calendars. Take the time, take the date, the day of the week, take the month, take the year, and even the leap year. We also have watches that perform certain tasks to keep the watch more accurate, i.e. things like the tourbillon, right? That will negate the effect that gravity had on the mainspring over a minute's worth of time created by Louis Breguet, God knows when, right? We also have minute repeaters. These are watches that will literally chime out the hours, the quarter hours, and the minutes. So if you're someone that's sitting in the dark or someone that cannot see, you can actually hear your time. Among many, many other innovations. And what gets more complicated is when you start taking all those complications and putting them together. When you have a chronograph or a split-second chronograph paired up with a perpetual calendar. All those things require what? They require a master skill set of watchmaking. Now, if you go back before CAD machines, if you go back before computers and CNC machines and modernized factories that we see today, you can see that very, very, very few actually managed to create such complication because every single gear was made by hand. Well, today we do have all that technology, and even still to this day, with all the research and development, with all the computers in the world, there's not a whole lot of companies that can create a grand complication watch. And that is a watch that pretty much has every complication in it, like this Audemars Piguet Grand Complication. This watch is a chronograph. It's not just a chronograph. It is a split-second chronograph, right? With a second-hand split, so you can actually measure laps, if you will, if you're on a horse racetrack or timing cars. Not very practical today's days, considering we have iPhones, right? But this is, remember, there's no computer inside there. There's no battery. There's not a little squirrel running around running this thing, right? It's all mechanical, which just makes it so mind-blowing. So this watch, perpetual calendar, chronograph, split-second chronograph, actually. And it is also a minute repeater that will chime out the time, as I mentioned earlier. And on top of it all, it's also an automatic. That takes months upon months of a master watchmaker at a company, such as Audemars Piguet, because you add the prestige of the name on it, to create one of these watches. And odds are there's maybe 2, 3, maybe 5 of these that can actually physically leave the factory, because when they do, they actually have to work. Prior to all of that, what's called research and development. That can take years. In the case of Audemars Piguet, hundreds of years, right? To get to a level where you're actually able to produce it. So what happens, as in any business, the amount of time and effort that has to be put into a particular watch, to include all the research and development and everything else, you're paying high money for high horology. And again, there are ways to show all these things, right? You can have, this is probably the highest level. This is the grand complication, but you can also have a minute repeater. Of course, this is not just any minute repeater. This is the Ulysse Nardin Circus minute repeater. So when the minute repeater is set off, there's an animation that goes on the screen, i.e. a circus scene, right? Giving it that next level thing. And again, this is something that takes a lot of research and development, a lot of time to create, and therefore the price tags are there. Retail price on this watch is $1,078,000. Retail Swiss, so about $1,200,000. Retail price on this watch was roughly around, back when it came out, if I remember correctly, $380,000. But just a watch that chimes, right? You would think, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Now, is this always the case? Is high horology always going to demand that humongous price tag? Yes, on the retail level. Meaning the retail price of a high horology watch i.e. a grand complication, a complicated watch, such as a minute repeater, such as a grand complication, or even just a tourbillon, right? Such as this Vacheron skeleton. It's always going to have that high retail price. And the reason for that is because watch manufacturing works very, very simply. You have the operating cost of the factory. You also have marketing costs. You have boutique costs. You have all these costs in a business that you sum up to, hey, what is every dollar coming in here costing me really, right? Between everything that we do. Trust me, a page on the back of the Rob report that 𝗵𝗵𝗆 has been occupying for the last God knows how many years is not very, very cheap, right? And then they say, okay, great. Now what does it cost me to actually develop each individual watch? Now it looks at the different models because it's a lot cheaper to produce a time-only watch than it is a grand complication. And then we decide, okay, well, we're going to have to mark our watches up X, either to the distributor or to the end public, and that's when we'll figure out the cost. This is why the more complicated the watch is, pretty obvious, the retail price tag is going to be higher. Well, here's one. What this is a Girard Perregaux. It is a split-second chronograph. It is a tourbillon, and it is a perpetual calendar. It's a grand complication that's in line with this. Well, yes, the original retail tag on this watch was quite high. Wasn't as high as Audemars Piguet. It wasn't in the million range. It was somewhere around the $500,000 price range. That's because there's also this thing called a name, right? Louis Vuitton can charge a lot more for their pair of sneakers or pair of jeans than that, let's say, of Lee or Levi's, if you will, right? Why is that? Well, it's because they've worked so many years to create such a reputation for themselves as being a high-end brand and therefore providing quality behind it. Although sometimes it's not true. A pair of Louis Vuitton jeans is no better than a pair of Levi's. In fact, probably a pair of Levi's is probably even better. I've had a pair of Louis Vuitton jeans that after 10 washes kind of went to shit, right? And that pair of jeans was $800 versus $80, right? It's what you've done with your brand image, and your brand image has a ton to do with it. On a secondary market, this is a watch that trades under $100,000, and it's just as complicated as this one. And you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, Roman, you said high horology is what drives the ticket price. Absolutely, but not necessarily often enough. In fact, most of the time, the high horology pieces that come out of these, even the major brands like Audemars Piguet or even Patek Philippe or even Girard Perregaux, which is a pretty big name, it's been around for a long time, yet it also has to do with popularity factor, where the brand stands in terms of being that popular brand. And oftentimes, even the most popular brands still suffer the fate of the secondary market really not paying as much. This is trading at less than half its retail value today. Why? Very simple mathematics. People, the minute you get over a price tag of $100,000, $150,000, $200,000, the pool of your buyers shrinks and shrinks tremendously, right? And the reason for that is because, look, I've always asked people that ask me, it's like, well, why is it that why are you paying so much less for this grand complication in terms of discount than versus its regular watch? Well, the math is very simple. I asked the guy one time, how many people do you personally know that can afford a $100,000 watch? And I'm asking someone who can't afford a $100,000 watch. So, well, maybe a few. I said, would you say the majority of the people that you know, semi-close with, acquaintances, can afford a $100,000 watch? He said, no. I said, as is the world, right? You do have sort of that top rich people of the world and bottom rich people, and bottom not so rich people of the world. And then if you take those people that you know that can afford a $100,000 watch, how many of those people actually spend that $100,000 on that particular watch, right? And this is where he goes, well, you're probably right, because my one buddy, he likes to spend money on cars, and the other one, he likes to spend money on expensive wine or art and antiques and so on and so forth. The pool of people shrinks tremendously. You have to understand something, that this hobby as a whole is very, very small. It may seem big with all the social media and all this other stuff, but it's not that big. It's a very, very small niche space where people that can afford the product and also are willing to spend money on that product live. And the minute you take a price point from 10,000 to 100 plus, that pool of people shrinks even further, resulting in a resale value that's quite lower. And popularity that's much less, seemingly. Because what happens when you walk into an authorized dealer or boutique that has the line of Audemars Piguet, and you're a guy that plays in a $50,000 price range or $20,000 price range, you will never look at a tourbillon or a minute repeater because most of those are going to be over 100,000 at a very minimum. So what happens seemingly makes those watches less popular. The manufacturers do produce less of them because they produce less of them and at the cost that it costed them to produce them, and they still need to produce this to show people how big their are. guess what happens? The retail price grows. And when the retail price becomes to a point where it's like outrageous, over $1 million, the resale value will always suffer. And that's really the bottom line when it comes to this. Now, there are other factors as to why a watch may be expensive. There's this thing called hype, right? Look at Richard Mille watches. And I'm gonna pull up a Richard Mille. This is an expensive Richard Mille. This is an $800,000 Richard Mille. This is the Todt Tourbillon World Timer, right? You would think, wait a minute, we just talked about this. This is a complicated watch. It's a world time, it's a combination of a world time watch with a tourbillon. This is a very expensive watch. No wonder it's $800,000. Absolutely. Well, Richard Mille managed to do one thing that many other brands wish they could do, to take their time-only watches and have them trading at 2x retail, where the retail prices start at over $100,000. The entry level to this brand is $100,000 minimum, and you're getting a time-only watch. You get it what people like to call seemingly a plastic watch, which is their TPT watches, right? Which is basically a carbon plastic material, like a Barbara Watson that will trade at 2x to 3x their retail value, depending on the variation of the watch. And yet, how's that possible? Well, there's this thing called trends, popularity. Certain celebrities wearing them, flex. We now live in a world that it's much more about the flex than it is the horology versus when I started 20-some years ago. And the reason for that is because social media, YouTube, social media on Instagram, TikTok, and so on and so forth, in your face. Everybody's sitting there scrolling and all that luxury stuff is in your face and it becomes popular. Oh, wait a minute, Richard Mille, if you got $1 million on your wrist and it's part of a multitude of rap songs by the most popular artists out there, all of a sudden the brand blows up and it's no longer the horology that's driving the price, it's now the popularity that's driving the price. Well, would you be surprised if I told you this watch sells for less than half its retail price? You're like, wait a minute, Roman, you're contradicting yourself. You're contradicting yourself. Of course I am. I said popularity, but I'm not. Because what's popular among Richard Mille is no-shape watches, not round-shaped watches, number one. And number two, if you look at Richard Mille, this gets to a price point much like this Grand Complication or this Ulysse Nardin, or perhaps this Girard Perregaux, where the original retail tag on it is 800,000 Swiss or dollars, whatever it might be. I think it's 780 Swiss, if I'm not mistaken. So now you have two things contradicting each other. Yes, it's the popular brand, not the popular model, or shape, I should say. And it also suffers the fate of being super high in price. Why? Well, now you have this new thing. Watches are an investment. You got watch indexes everywhere. You got Bloomberg. You got everybody and their mother talking about watches as an investment. I preached for years watches are not an investment, rather than an expensive toy, a piece of art that you can enjoy on your wrist. I'm having a hard time arguing that when you hear things like Rolex outdid the S&P 500, or the Patek Nautilus market has blown up to where it's outdoing this index and that index and so on and so forth. So now people are buying this consciously. And what everybody knows is that if I walk into this boutique and I buy this plain Jane Richard Mille and I have room over retail, meaning I can pull it out of here and go and sell it and make money, that's a great investment. The minute you get into price ranges of $500,000, $600,000, $800,000, very tough to do so, because odds are you can find this at the boutique. So therefore, you don't have to go to the secondary and overpay for a piece like this. It becomes less attractive, the value drops, along with the fact that it's not the trendiest Richard Mille. Now, you also have independent watchmakers. First of all, I'm going to pull up my favorite, and that is Max Büsser, and MB&F, Max Büsser and Friends, and I'm going to put up a Greubel 4Z. The entry-level price to these watches is extremely, extremely high. I shouldn't say entry-level, I should say the entry into these watches is extremely high due to the fact that these are small manufacturers with not big money behind them. An independent watchmaker is somebody that's 20 years or younger usually, right? Somewhere around that range. They don't belong to a big group that has big budgets and also can cut costs on back office costs, because any business has this thing called back office. Your accountants, your photographers, it's the people that clean your office, right? It's your administrators, it's your finance guys, it's your marketing guys, it's your social media guys. That's called back office expense. If you are Hublot and you're part of a big group, or Breguet, that's part of Swatch, or let's take a couple of groups. Let's take Richemont, let's take Swatch. So if you're Hublot, a 𝗙𝗃𝗄𝗄, or if you're Breguet or Blancpain, you belong to a group. A lot of the back office costs actually cut pretty tremendously, meaning that it's centralized. Now you have one centralized hub that's working for a multitude of brands as one brand. When you just all on your own, you're paying for all your marketing expenses. You're not splitting it with 5 other brand watches. Number two, what independent watchmakers thrive to do, something that has never been done before, whether it's in form of design for a watch that looks pretty crazy, I'm sure you'll say, or whether it's in a form of every watch being literally hand fitted, done by hand as it used to be done, tested numerous times, and takes a year to produce one. What happens? You produce a very, very small amount of watches, and that's what independent watchmakers are about. A very, very small batch of watches are produced every year. Greubel Forsey, I don't think, passes 200 watches a month. Compare that to Audemars Piguet, 65,000 watches a month. That means you don't have the factory capabilities of that of Audemars Piguet, and let alone these big groups, right? Also means you don't outsource certain parts of your watch to other manufacturers in Switzerland. The biggest business in Switzerland is actually making watch parts. Cases, screws, mainsprings, tourbillon movements right out of the box, right? How many watches out there in the Swiss watch industry that are actually using other people's movements like Jaegers or ETA or Vacheron, right? Limania, all those factories are powerhouses. Some of them make more money than the manufacturers. What do the independents do? They make their own. They make every single screw on theirs by themselves. They make every single spring by themselves. What does that do? That drives up the cost. Why do they make such a small amount of watches? Because they can't make more. And if they do, they won't sell as many, because by making so little watches, it becomes a very, very niche market, and it's very hard to break through in the market of watches and compete, guys, against monsters such as these. So what happens? Small production, higher retail prices because there's a higher cost. Very easy to go out there and outsource screws or mainsprings or cases and things like that. But because they're doing something new, something different, something avant-garde, they're the leaders of the industry when it comes to making something new, actually inventing something new. Because in the world of horology, new stuff hasn't been invented for hundreds of years. It is the independents, like Max Büsser, for example, that made the sequential chronograph. That's a chronograph that's never existed. Richard Mille, which is technically also an independent, made a single clutch split-second chronograph back in the day. Now, all those things attribute to the fact that's why the retail prices are so high on these things. Your entry-level Greubel Forsey is going to be over $300,000. Your MB&Fs are going to be up there. Maybe not all of them over 100,000, but certainly close to it, right? And it's not because they're trying to make more money. A lot of these companies are not really making a killing whatsoever, even if they sold every single watch at its retail price. The bottom line is that you need a certain amount of money to run the ship. And if you are a manufacturer that manufactures anything, I don't care what it is, you know what your cost of manufacturing is, and you then decide, okay, I would like to mark it up such as this in order to take a little bit of profit home. That's your independence. Of course, there's more. Collectible, vintage, ladies, diamond watches. There's so many things out there that will contribute to a price. I'm gonna go to a Hublot. You guys are gonna say, Hublot? That's not a brand that keeps its value. Name me a Hublot that trades over list. There's maybe a couple. How is this particular Hublot $200,000? That's what the last price of that watch fetched at auction. Hublot notoriously, especially the King Powers, the 48mm behemoths, have like the worst resale value. You can find older King Powers for pennies on a dollar online, right? This is from the times where bigger was better. Well, unless this watch belonged to a famous individual, where this particular watch actually belonged to Diego Maradona. All my American fans, name, you obviously have heard the name, but it may not mean as much to you as it does, let's say, for those from Argentina, South America, Europe, where soccer is a lot more popular. And I will get this plastic off, I promise you, so you can see the back of the watch. Actually, I will show it in B-roll. So this is one of 4 watches created specifically for Diego Maradona. And at the back of the watch, you'll notice a picture of him. This is a watch he wore personally. It was photo matched, and one of the 4 fetched $220,000 at auction. If this was not a Diego Maradona watch, this would be a $20,000 watch. Why is this 10x? Well, because of the person behind it, right? Think of the Marlon Brando Rolex that sold for $4.5 million. Think of the Paul Newman Daytona that Paul Newman himself wore that sold for gajillions of dollars. I don't remember the exact number. It was one of the record-holding watches, right? When you tie something that's near and dear to somebody's heart in terms of an actual individual, a famous individual that has humongous exposure or had humongous exposure, that price goes up to what one is willing to pay for it. Much as I would love to sit here and tell you that, you know, this is an equal opportunity hobby when it comes to collecting watches, it's not. It's predominantly a sausage club, as I like to call it. It's predominantly male driven, right? You don't hear of a lot of female watch collectors out there. You don't see a lot of females going apeshit over a tourbillon or a minute repeater or anything else of that sort, or Richard Mille, right? It's usually men. And if you guys go on my YouTube page or my Instagram page and look at the analytics, I'm at 90% male followers versus female. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. I know plenty of female watch collectors out there, but for the most part, it's men. So what do you do to entice somebody who's not into horology? You entice them with aesthetics. How do you entice a woman with aesthetics? Watches become more of a jewelry piece. Funny enough, I brought out a Queen of Naples, Breguet Queen of Naples, the first wristwatch ever made. That's right, the first wristwatch ever made was a lady's watch. It was a Queen of Naples, made for the Queen of Naples by Louis Breguet. Shortly followed up after by Cartier. But look at this watch aesthetically. That is the most gorgeous, beautiful watch anybody could ever lay their eyes on. If you look at that watch, I don't care if you, whatever watches you're into, aesthetically, it's a beautiful watch. It's also a beautiful piece of jewelry. When it comes to jewelry, what beautifies jewelry better than anything? Diamonds, bling, right? There's something about those precious little stones that have kept their prices up really, really high for so many years, and even things like lab-grown diamonds still don't affect real diamonds, in a way, I should say, to an extent. Please don't take this in a sexist way, but based on experience, and you can ask any store owner, of course, people will be afraid to speak up. They'll say, oh, Roman, you're a feminist, or you're against women. I'm not. I have 2 daughters, a wife and a female dog. So, but think of it this way. Think of a situation where a female's watch is bought, right? If you took 10 females or 20 females, and you put them in a scenario where they're buying a watch, out of those 10, 20 females, how many of those watches are being bought for them by their significant others as a gift? This is not to downgrade a woman or upgrade a man. Please don't get into all of that stuff with me. This isn't what it's all about. But situationally, usually, female watches are usually a gift from a significant other down to their wife, girlfriend, whatever it might be. What happens in that case? What happens to an average man when he walks into, that has a little bit of change and walks into a place that sells expensive things that he wants to buy for his significant others? Typical male mentality, we want to show the world how big our is. The more expensive, and if we can afford it, the better the outcome. So the markup on these things, especially when it comes to diamonds, is insane. You look at Cartier, it's like $10,000 a carat for stones that can be bought for $1,000 a carat. It's like 10x on just the diamonds themselves, right? They mark up the work, they mark up all those things. You know why? Because they can. Because they can, right? If this is something that's gonna 9 out of 10 times end up as a gift, why not charge up? Because you know what? When I'm with my wife and we go shopping somewhere and we walk into a store, obviously I don't walk into watch stores, but if we walk into an expensive store that sells shoes and she says, oh, I like those. Is it really is it really gonna make a difference if I can afford to play in that price range, whether they're not as reasonably marked up as the male watches or the male shoes? It's not. And that's the point I'm trying to make without trying to sound sexist or anything else. That's just the plain truth. This is what happens when it comes to most female watches, which is why most female watches have some kind of diamonds on them, because the minute they throw a tiny little diamond bezel, even on a tag heuer, the markup goes through the roof. You're gonna say, well, wait a minute, Roman, what is this? Well, this is a men's watch that's blinged out. And this is another case where what happens is you outfit a complicated watch, because this is a Girard Perregaux triple bridge tourbillon. We talked about that earlier, the brand, right? But then you outfit it with their most iconic complication, which is a triple bridge tourbillon, and it's an absolutely gorgeous watch, a knockout of a watch, most likely something that was custom made for somebody, because this is a piece unique. You outfit it with a ton of diamonds, not just any diamonds, but get diamonds, which is the most expensive in sale of watches, because it's very hard to find matching diamonds and fit them together in order to create something like this, which is diamonds all around. And you throw a retail price tag on this of $1.650 million. And this watch resells for a third of that, right? And there's a reason for that, because number one, not a lot of guys will wear diamond watches. In fact, 9 out of 10 guys would not be caught dead wearing this watch, no matter how much it costs, right? Number two, again, that high retail price. And number three, the brand itself. And there's been, now you say to me, well, what if this was an Audemars Piguet? Okay, wouldn't matter, right? It wouldn't matter. What if this was a Richard Mille? Probably still wouldn't matter. Well, it's round for one. But if you look at everything I told you guys so far, you will often find combinations. This is where it gets really, really confusing. You'll find combination of everything I said, what I'm talking about, independence, ladies' watches, specific complication, its retail price, the brand itself, what's hot within the brand itself. You start putting all these things together, you start to get a somewhat of a clear picture as to why some of these watches are so damn expensive. But the bottom line is there are many, 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 many factors that can answer the question of why is this watch so damn expensive? I'm pretty sure I confused you even further on the topic, but I'm at least hoping that I opened up your eyes a little bit. So when you're out there making your next decision as to why am I buying the watch and why is this watch this much, both on a primary and a secondary market, in the very least, you can look at it from a genre perspective, or at least from some of the points that I made in this video, to make up your mind in regards to, am I really getting a value for my money? Am I out here just spending money buying what I like first and foremost? I hope you choose the second one, because I always say the same thing. Buy what you like first and foremost within a price range that you can afford. Because at the end of the day, it's something very intimate and close to you. So every time you look down at your wrist, if it's going to bring you a little bit more joy based on whatever factor I just went through, then I've done my job in this video. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.